What if I told you that the most important love story of your life is not about finding someone else, but about finally choosing yourself, the way you once waited for someone to choose you? I once believed love meant disappearing into someone else. I believed that caring deeply meant sacrificing my time, my dreams, my peace, and even my voice. I measured my worth by how much I could give, how much I could endure, and how long I could wait for someone to love me back the way I loved them. I didn't realize that while I was busy pouring myself into another person, I was slowly leaving myself behind. I remember how my days revolved around their presence. Their messages decided my mood. Their silence decided my worth. I adjusted my plans, my priorities, even my personality, just to stay connected. I called it love, but deep inside, it felt like losing a part of myself every single day. Focusing on them became easier than facing the emptiness I felt when I was alone. Then one day, love left. Not loudly, not dramatically, it left quietly, taking with it all the excuses I had made for ignoring myself. And for the first time, I was alone with the person I had neglected the most. Myself. That silence forced me to listen, and what I heard was pain mixed with truth. I realized I had been loyal to everyone except me. Focusing on yourself begins when you stop begging for love and start offering it inward. It is the moment you choose to sit with your emotions instead of running from them. It is learning to say no without explaining, resting without guilt, and dreaming without asking permission. Just like love, self-focus requires patience, consistency, and courage. I started treating myself the way I wished someone else had. I listened when I was tired. I protected my boundaries like promises. I spent time alone not as punishment, but as healing. Slowly, I stopped chasing affection and started building connection with myself. The more I focused on my growth, the less I needed validation from outside. Focusing on yourself is not selfish. It is an act of self-respect. When you choose yourself, you stop shrinking to fit into someone else's life and start expanding into your own. You become your own home, your own comfort, your own source of love. And one day, you realize the love you were searching for in others was always waiting for you within yourself. I lost myself while loving someone else, not all at once, but slowly, in quiet moments that didn't seem dangerous at the time. It began with small compromises, choosing their comfort over my honesty, their happiness over my peace. I told myself this is what love looks like, this is how you prove you care. I stopped asking what I needed and started asking what would keep them close. Every choice felt like devotion, but each one took me a little further away from who I was before love entered my life. I reshaped my days around their presence. My mornings began with waiting for their messages, my nights ended with replaying our conversations, searching for hidden meanings. If they were distant, I became anxious. If they were warm, I felt alive. Their attention became my oxygen, and without realizing it, I handed them the responsibility of my emotional survival. I forgot how to breathe on my own. I began silencing parts of myself that didn't fit into their world. My opinions softened, my dreams grew quieter, and my boundaries blurred. Things that once mattered to me started to feel inconvenient. I laughed at jokes that hurt, agreed with decisions I didn't believe in, and stayed quiet when my heart wanted to speak. I convinced myself that understanding meant endurance, that patience meant self-denial. As love deepened, my identity faded. I stopped doing things that made me feel whole because they didn't align with someone else's expectations. My hobbies became memories, my passions became excuses, and my individuality became negotiable. I was present in the relationship but absent from my own life. I didn't notice the emptiness growing because I was too busy filling someone else's cup. I thought losing myself was temporary, that one day I would return to who I was. But the longer I stayed, the harder it became to recognize my own reflection. I felt tired without knowing why, sad without a clear reason. I carried emotional weight that wasn't mine, and I called it love. I believed that if I loved harder, gave more, stayed longer, everything would eventually feel right. In loving someone else so deeply, I unknowingly abandoned myself, mistaking sacrifice for connection and forgetting that love was never meant to cost me my identity. Heartbreak did not arrive as a single moment, it arrived as a slow realization that the love I was holding on to no longer held me back. When it ended, I expected chaos, tears, and anger, but what I felt most was an unfamiliar silence. The kind of silence that forces you to sit with yourself, without distractions, without excuses, without someone else to lean on. In that stillness, I began to understand how deeply I had neglected myself while trying to be everything for someone else. For the first time, I listened to my own emotions instead of explaining them away. I felt the ache in my chest and allowed it to exist without rushing to fix it. I noticed how tired I was, not just from the breakup, but from years of overgiving, overthinking, and overloving. Heartbreak became a mirror, reflecting the parts of me that had been ignored for far too long. It showed me where I had compromised my boundaries and where I had accepted less than I deserved. As the days passed, I stopped blaming the other person and started asking myself honest questions. Why did I stay silent when something hurt me? Why did I confuse attention with affection? Why did I believe love required me to disappear? Those questions were uncomfortable, but they were necessary. Each answer pulled me closer to a version of myself I had forgotten, a version that deserved care, respect, and patience. Healing did not feel like strength at first. It felt like vulnerability. It meant admitting that I had abandoned myself out of fear of being alone. It meant recognizing that I had sought love to fill a void that only I could heal. Slowly, I learned to sit with my pain without romanticizing it. I stopped chasing closure from someone else and started creating it within myself. Self-love did not arrive as confidence or happiness. It arrived as acceptance. Accepting my flaws, my mistakes, and my emotional needs without judgment. I began doing small things for myself, resting when I was exhausted, speaking honestly even when my voice trembled, choosing solitude over emotional chaos. Heartbreak became the beginning of a relationship with myself, one built on awareness, honesty, and compassion. Through that pain, I discovered that loving myself was not about becoming someone new, but about returning to who I was before I learned to abandon myself for love. Choosing myself felt wrong at first, like I was breaking an unspoken rule I had followed my entire life. I was used to putting others first, measuring my worth by how useful I was, how available I remained, how much I could give without asking for anything in return. When I finally decided to focus on myself, guilt followed immediately, whispering that I was being selfish, cold, and ungrateful. It took time to understand that this guilt was not a sign of wrongdoing, but a sign of growth. I began by setting small boundaries, and even those felt heavy. Saying no made my heart race. Choosing rest over obligation felt like betrayal. I worried about disappointing people who were used to having unlimited access to me. I had been conditioned to believe that love meant constant availability, that being needed was proof of my value. Choosing myself challenged that belief and forced me to confront how deeply I had tied my identity to pleasing others. As I continued, I realized how often I had said yes while silently resenting it. I had smiled while feeling drained, agreed while feeling unheard. Choosing myself meant listening to that quiet inner voice and finally taking it seriously. It meant honoring my energy instead of explaining it away. I learned that my needs were not inconveniences and my limits were not flaws. Each boundary I set was an act of self-respect, not rejection. The fear of being misunderstood stayed with me for a while. Some people questioned my change, others pulled away. That hurt, but it also revealed the truth about which connections were built on mutual respect and which were built on my self-neglect. I stopped chasing approval and started valuing alignment. I no longer bent myself into shapes that made others comfortable at the cost of my peace. Over time, choosing myself became quieter and stronger. It showed up in how I spent my time, how I spoke to myself, how I allowed others to treat me. I stopped apologizing for growing. I stopped shrinking my emotions to make them easier to handle. I understood that choosing myself did not mean loving others less, it meant loving myself enough to show up whole rather than empty. In choosing myself without guilt, I reclaimed parts of me that had been buried under obligation, expectation, and fear, and I learned that self-love does not demand permission from anyone else. Healing did not happen in crowded rooms or loud moments of celebration, it happened in the quiet spaces where I learned to sit with myself without distraction. Becoming my own safe place meant no longer running away from my emotions or waiting for someone else to rescue me from them. I began to understand that comfort did not always come from being held by another person, sometimes it came from holding myself together when everything felt uncertain. I started paying attention to how I spoke to myself in moments of weakness. I noticed the harshness in my inner voice, the blame, the impatience, the unrealistic expectations. Slowly, I softened that voice. I replaced judgment with understanding, criticism with compassion. When I felt overwhelmed, I allowed myself to pause instead of pushing harder. I learned that safety begins with permission to feel without fear of punishment. Being my own safe place also meant creating emotional boundaries. I stopped reopening wounds for people who did not know how to handle my vulnerability. I chose peace over chaos, clarity over confusion. I learned to walk away from situations that made me question my worth. Protecting my energy became a form of love, not isolation. I realized that not everyone deserved access to my deepest emotions. In solitude, I rediscovered what grounded me. Simple routines, quiet mornings, moments of reflection that didn't demand performance or validation. I began to trust myself again, to believe that I could handle my pain without escaping it. When sadness came, I stayed. When fear surfaced, I listened. I no longer rushed to distract myself or numb my emotions. I allowed them to pass through me, knowing they were temporary visitors, not permanent residents. Healing also required forgiveness, especially toward myself. I forgave the version of me who stayed too long, who ignored red flags, who confused attachment with love. I understood that I did the best I could with the awareness I had at the time. Letting go of self-blame created space for growth. It allowed me to rebuild trust within myself, piece by piece. As I became my own safe place, I stopped seeking reassurance from others and started finding stability within. I learned that safety is not the absence of pain, but the presence of self-support, patience, and emotional honesty that remains even when everything else feels uncertain. Building a future where I am the priority did not happen through grand promises or dramatic changes, it happened through daily choices that quietly reshaped my life. I began to look at my future not through the lens of who might join me, but through who I was becoming. For the first time, my plans were not centered around being chosen, approved, or needed by someone else. They were centered around my growth, my peace, and my long-term well-being. I started investing in myself the way I once invested in others. I gave my time to learning, to improving my skills, to strengthening my body and mind. I stopped postponing my dreams for the sake of comfort or companionship. Each step forward felt like a promise to myself that I would no longer abandon my own potential. I understood that prioritizing myself meant building a life I didn't need to escape from. My standards changed as my self-respect grew. I became more selective with my energy, my relationships, and my commitments. I no longer tolerated inconsistency or emotional confusion. I chose environments that supported my growth instead of draining it. The future I envisioned required discipline, clarity, and self-trust, and I was finally willing to provide those things for myself. I learned to measure success differently. It was no longer about how much I impressed others or how loved I appeared to be. It was about how aligned I felt with my values, how peaceful my mind was at the end of the day, how honestly I showed up for myself. Progress became personal, not performative. As I built this future, I accepted that choosing myself might sometimes feel lonely. But that loneliness was lighter than the exhaustion of self-betrayal. I learned to enjoy my own company, to celebrate my milestones quietly, to trust my own direction even when no one else understood it. I became my own source of motivation, encouragement, and belief. By making myself the priority, I wasn't closing my heart to love, I was preparing it for a healthier, deeper connection, one that would complement my life rather than consume it, because the future I was creating was rooted in self-worth, intention, and emotional balance.